There's a silence that most people never learn to hear. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of something so profound that words become unnecessary. 7 centuries ago, a mystic named Rumi discovered this silence in the most unlikely place, in the heart of devastating loss. And what he found there changed not just his life, but the lives of millions who would come after him. You see, Rumi wasn't always the poet whose words dance through our hearts today. He was once Jalal ad-Din, a respected scholar, a man of books and learning, someone who understood God through scripture and study. But then something happened that shattered his entire world. A wandering dervish named Shams of Tabriz appeared in his life like lightning in a clear sky. And in that meeting, everything Rumi thought he knew about love, about God, about himself, simply dissolved. Most people think of Rumi as a poet, but that's not who he was. He was a man who learned to listen to the silence between heartbeats. He was someone who discovered that the deepest truths aren't written in books. They're whispered in the spaces where words fail. He said, "Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation." You're going to understand why that silence he discovered might be the most important thing you never learned to hear. Because here's what nobody tells you about life. We spend our entire existence trying to fill the quiet spaces. We're terrified of the pause, the gap, the moment when there's nothing but us, and the echo of our own thoughts. We reach for our phones. We turn on music. We start conversations. We do anything to avoid that frightening emptiness. But what if I told you that this emptiness isn't empty at all? What if the very thing you're running from is the doorway to everything you've been searching for? Rumi knew this. He lived it. And through his words, he's been trying to tell us for 700 years that the treasure we seek isn't hidden in some distant place. It's buried in the silence we're afraid to enter. In 1244, in the ancient city of Konya, a meeting took place that would change the course of mystical poetry forever. Rumi was 37 years old, a scholar of Islamic law, respected, learned, living what most would call a successful life. Then Shams appeared, not with credentials or wealth, but with something far more dangerous. He came with questions that had no easy answers. Their first recorded conversation began with what seemed like a simple question. Who is greater, the Prophet Muhammad or the mystic Bayezid Bastami? But it wasn't really a question at all. It was a key turning in a lock that Rumi didn't even know existed. In that moment, something broke open inside him. Not his mind, but something deeper. His heart cracked like an egg, and what poured out wasn't knowledge, but longing. Shams wasn't there to teach Rumi facts. He was there to awaken him to a different way of knowing. A knowing that comes not from books, but from burning. Not from thinking, but from feeling. Not from understanding, but from surrendering. Rumi later wrote, "The moment I first heard love, I gave up my soul, my heart, and my eyes." But here's the thing about awakening. It's not comfortable. It's not peaceful. It's not what you expect. It's devastating. Everything you thought you knew about yourself gets stripped away. Everything you thought was solid starts to dissolve. And in that dissolution, you discover something extraordinary. You discover that what you thought was, you was just a costume. And underneath that costume is something vast, something luminous, something that has been waiting your entire life to be recognized. This is what happened to Rumi. Shams held up a mirror, and in that mirror, Rumi saw not a scholar, not a teacher, not a man with answers. He saw a soul on fire. He saw someone who had been sleepwalking through life, dreaming he was awake. And once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. The old Rumi died in that moment, and what was born was something entirely new. For 3 years, Rumi and Shams were inseparable. They would spend hours, sometimes days, in spiritual conversation. They would disappear into silence so deep that those around them could feel the presence of something sacred. Rumi's students became jealous. His family grew concerned. How could their respected teacher be so consumed by this mysterious stranger? But Rumi had found something he didn't even know he was looking for. He had found his spiritual twin, his perfect mirror, the one person who could see him completely and love him anyway. He wrote, "I am only the house of your beloved, not the beloved herself. True love is for the treasure, not for the coffer that contains it." And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, Shams vanished. Some say he was murdered by jealous students. Others believe he simply walked away. his purpose fulfilled. But for Rumi, the disappearance was catastrophic. The one person who had shown him his true face was gone. The mirror was shattered, and in that shattering, something miraculous happened. Rumi began to write, not the careful, scholarly prose he had written before, but poetry that poured out of him like water from a broken dam. Words that danced and spun and whirled with a life of their own. He wrote as if his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. The poetry became his prayer, his meditation, his way of staying connected to the divine presence he had tasted in shams. He wrote, "Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form." And in writing those words, he discovered something profound. Shams hadn't really left. The love he had awakened, the presence he had revealed, the divine spark he had ignited, all of it was still there. It had never been dependent on Sham's physical presence. It had always been within Rumi himself. This is the first great lesson Rumi offers us, that what we seek in others is already within us, that the love we think we've lost is indestructible, that the presence we long for is always here, waiting to be recognized. But we have to be willing to look in the right place. We have to be willing to turn our attention inward, to the silence that lives at the center of our being. Most people never make this turn. They spend their entire lives looking for completion in external things, in relationships, in achievements, in possessions, in experiences, and there's nothing wrong with any of these things. But they're not where the treasure is buried. The treasure is in the silence. The treasure is in the space between thoughts. The treasure is in the pause between breaths. Rumi discovered this in the most painful way possible, through loss, through the devastating realization that everything external is temporary. Everything you can hold on to will eventually slip through your fingers. But what cannot be lost is the awareness that recognizes this truth. What cannot be taken is the silence that witnesses all coming and going. He wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." And this wasn't just poetry. This was lived experience. The wound of losing Shams became the opening through which divine light poured into his life. The breaking became the blessing. The ending became the beginning. This is why Rumi's words still speak to us today, because he's not writing from theory. He's writing from the fire. He's writing from the place where the human heart breaks open and discovers it was never really broken at all. He's writing from the silence that remains when all the noise falls away. But here's what's beautiful about Rumi's story. He didn't disappear into some cave to contemplate his enlightenment. He didn't become a hermit, removed from the world. Instead, he became more present, more engaged, more alive than ever before. He founded a spiritual order. He taught students. He wrote poetry that continues to transform lives 7 centuries later. The silence he discovered wasn't an escape from life. It was a deeper engagement with it. It was a way of being present that allowed him to see the divine in everything, in the face of a stranger, in the song of a bird, in the taste of bread, in the touch of a friend's hand. Everything became sacred because he had learned to see with the eyes of the heart. This is what 20 minutes with Rumi can offer you. Not a philosophy to think about, but a presence to feel. Not words to memorize, but a silence to enter. Not answers to collect, but a question to live. And that question is simple. What if the thing you're looking for has been looking for you all along? The ancient mystics knew something we've forgotten. They knew that there's a voice that speaks in silence, a wisdom that whispers in stillness, a love that reveals itself only when we stop trying so hard to find it. Rumi called this voice the beloved, and he spent his life learning to listen to it. He wrote, "Listen with ears of tolerance. See through the eyes of compassion. Speak with the language of love. But before any of this is possible, we have to learn to be still. We have to learn to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. We have to learn to trust the silence that our culture has taught us to fear. Because in that silence, something extraordinary happens. The chatter of the mind begins to quiet. The anxiety of the ego starts to dissolve. And what remains is a presence so vast, so peaceful, so full of love that you realize you've been searching for it your entire life without knowing it. This presence isn't something you have to create. It's something you have to uncover. It's like the sun that's always shining, even when clouds block our view. The clouds are our thoughts, our fears, our endless mental activity. but the sun is always there, waiting patiently for the clouds to part. Rumi learned to part the clouds, not through effort, but through surrender, not through trying, but through allowing, not through understanding, but through falling in love. He fell in love with the mystery itself. He fell in love with the question that has no answer. He fell in love with the silence that speaks louder than words. What happens when you stop seeking the divine somewhere out there and start recognizing the pulse of the sacred within your own breath? What happens when you realize that the very ache in your chest, the longing that keeps you awake at night, is not evidence of God's absence, but proof of God's presence pressing against the walls of your awareness? This is where Rumi's teachings stop being poetry and start being medicine. This is where his words cease to be beautiful ideas and become a lived reality that transforms how you move through the world. Because Rumi didn't write from the mountaintop, dispensing wisdom to those below. He wrote from inside the fire, and his words are the smoke rising from that burning. The silence he discovered, the silence beyond words, is not empty. It's full. It's pregnant with presence. It's the kind of quiet that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something so vast that it makes all noise seem like whispers. And this silence is available to you right now. Not after you've read more books, not after you've meditated for years, not after you've become worthy. Now, listen to the space between your thoughts. Feel the pause between your inhale and exhale. That gap, that seeming emptiness, is where the divine lives. It's where the beloved waits, not as a distant figure, but as the very awareness that recognizes the gap itself. Rumi called this the field beyond right and wrong, beyond knowing and not knowing, beyond seeking and finding. But here's what most people miss about Rumi's path. They think the goal is to eliminate the longing, to finally arrive at a place where the ache stops. But Rumi discovered something far more profound. The longing itself is the beloved. The very hunger for God is God calling you home. The pain of separation is actually the joy of union disguised as its opposite. This is why he could say that the wound is where the light enters, not because suffering is good, but because suffering cracks open the shell of the ego, creates space for something larger to move through you. The breaking is not the problem. The breaking is the point. It's how love gets in. It's how the divine presence that was always there finally has room to be felt. And when you stop running from the breaking, when you stop trying to fix yourself or understand yourself or perfect yourself, something shifts. The seeker dissolves into the sought. The lover merges with the beloved. The drop remembers it was always the ocean. But this isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous surrender. Every day, every moment, you have the choice to step back into the silence, to remember that you are not the noise in your head, but the awareness that witnesses it. You are not the story of your life, but the presence that experiences it. You are not the seeker, but the very thing you've been seeking. Rumi's great gift was showing us that the spiritual path is not about becoming someone else. It's about remembering who you already are. It's about peeling away the layers of conditioning, the masks of identity, the stories of separation until only truth remains. And that truth is love. Not love as emotion or attachment, but love as the very fabric of existence itself. This is why his poetry still moves people 8 centuries later. It's not speaking to your mind. It's speaking to your soul. It's reminding you of something you've always known, but perhaps forgotten, that you are not separate from the source of life, that you're not alone in your longing, that the very fact that you ache for something more is proof that something more is already here. So when you feel that familiar hunger, that restless searching, don't try to satisfy it with more knowledge or more experiences. Let it be. Let it burn. Let it carve you hollow so that you can be filled with presence, because the emptiness you fear is actually the spaciousness you've been seeking. The longing you're trying to escape is the very thing that will carry you home. Rumi's final teaching is perhaps his simplest. Love is not something you find. Love is what you are when everything else falls away. The beloved is not somewhere else. The beloved is the awareness reading these words right now. The divine is not in the temple or the mosque or the church. The divine is in the recognition that there is no separation between the one who seeks and the one who is sought. This is the silence beyond words. This is the presence beyond form. This is the love that needs no object because it is the very subject of all experience. And it's yours. It's always been yours. You just forgot how to listen. The invitation is simple. Stop seeking and start being. Stop asking and start receiving. Stop trying to find God and start letting God find you. Because the truth is, you were never lost. You were never separate. You were never alone. You were always held in the silence that speaks without words, loved by the presence that needs no form, guided by the wisdom that surpasses all understanding. This is Rumi's gift. Not answers, but presence. Not solutions, but silence. Not teachings, but transformation. Listen to him for 20 minutes, and he won't give you something new. He'll remind you of something ancient, something that was true before you were born, and will be true long after you're gone. Something that is true right now, in this moment, in the space between these words, and the awareness that receives them. You are that awareness. You are that presence. You are that love. And that changes everything.